The sun beat down mercilessly on Violet Chapman's back as she dismounted from her horse, wiping sweat from her brow with a handkerchief that had long since lost its pristine whiteness. Lovelock, Nevada wasn't much to look at. A dusty collection of buildings stretched along the main street like weary travelers resting against each other for support, but after 3 weeks of hard travel from Sacramento, it might as well have been the promised land. It was 1876, and the West was still wild enough to make a woman traveling alone an oddity worth noting. Violet felt the stares as she led her mare to the water trough outside the general store. She was 25, unmarried, and unaccompanied, 3 strikes against her in the eyes of proper society. But proper society hadn't been able to offer her what she needed most, a fresh start. "You look like you've come a fair piece," observed an older woman sweeping the boardwalk in front of the store. Violet nodded, allowing her horse to drink deeply. "From California. I've come to stay with my aunt, Margaret Chapman." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Maggie Chapman, the midwife, the very same." "Well, I'll be." She never mentioned having kin coming to visit. Violet's smile tightened. "It was rather sudden. Could you point me in the direction of her house?" After receiving directions to her aunt's home at the edge of town, Violet remounted and rode slowly past the various establishments that made up Lovelock. A saloon, naturally, the sheriff's office, a small hotel, a barber shop, everything coated in a fine layer of Nevada dust. The railroad had only recently extended this far, breathing new life into what had been little more than a way station on the emigrant trail. Aunt Margaret's cottage sat nestled beneath 2 large cottonwood trees, the only substantial greenery for what seemed like miles. It was a modest dwelling but neat, with a small garden plot and a chicken coop visible around back. Violet's heart tightened at the sight. This was to be her refuge now, her sanctuary from the pain and scandal she'd left behind. She was tying her horse to the hitching post when she noticed the note pinned to the door. It was brief and to the point. "Gone to Sullivan Ranch, baby coming, back by sunset." Violet sighed. She should have expected this. Her aunt had written about her busy life as the only midwife for miles around. After a moment's hesitation, Violet decided to make herself useful. She unsaddled her horse, led the animal to the small corral beside the house, and set about fetching water from the well to wash away the trail dust. By sunset, Aunt Margaret still hadn't returned. Violet had found the spare key beneath a flower pot, just as her aunt had mentioned in correspondence, and had made herself at home. She prepared a simple supper and waited, but as darkness fell completely, concern began to gnaw at her. Childbirth could be unpredictable, of course, but she couldn't help worrying. Just as she was considering saddling up again to ask directions to the Sullivan Ranch, the sound of rapidly approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. She stepped onto the porch, lantern in hand, and found herself facing not her aunt but a tall man on a lathered horse. "You Margaret Chapman?" he asked without preamble, his hat pulled low over his eyes. "No, I'm her niece, Violet. Aunt Margaret isn't here." The man cursed under his breath. "She at the Sullivan place still?" "I believe so. Is something wrong? Mare's foaling at my ranch and something ain't right." He ran a hand through dark hair streaked with dust. "Name's Tucker Evans. I've got a spread about 5 miles east." "Your aunts helped with difficult births before animal and human alike." Violet hesitated only briefly. "My aunt isn't here, but I might be able to help. I assisted a veterinarian in Sacramento for several years." Tucker studied her skeptically. "No offense, miss, but a foaling gone wrong is serious business." "I'm aware," Violet replied, her chin lifting slightly. "I've helped deliver more than a dozen foals. If your mare is in trouble, waiting for my aunt could mean losing both her and the foal." Something in her direct gaze must have convinced him because he nodded abruptly. "Can you ride fast? Give me 2 minutes to change and saddle my horse." True to her word, Violet emerged moments later wearing a split riding skirt and boots. She had pinned her dark hair up more securely and grabbed a small bag of supplies she'd spotted on her aunt's shelves: clean cloths, twine, a small knife, and a bottle of carbolic acid for disinfection. They rode hard through the darkness, the moon and stars providing just enough light to follow the trail. Tucker Evans set a punishing pace, but Violet matched it without complaint. The urgency of the situation pressed on them both. What's happening with the mare? She called over the drumming of hooves. She's been laboring for hours. Foal's not coming right, I can see a leg, but it's just one and it ain't moving like it should. Violet nodded grimly. A breech birth or malpresentation, dangerous for both mother and foal. The Evans Ranch appeared suddenly out of the darkness, a modest main house with a large barn and several outbuildings. A lantern glowed from inside the barn, and Tucker headed straight for it, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. Violet followed suit. Inside the barn, a beautiful chestnut mare lay on her side in a large stall padded with fresh straw. Her sides heaved with exertion, and even from the entrance, Violet could see the strain on the animal's face. A young ranch hand paced nervously nearby. "Jim, this is Miss Chapman's niece." "She's going to help," Tucker announced, moving immediately to the mare's head, stroking her neck and murmuring soft reassurances. Violet didn't waste time with further introductions. She removed her jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and approached the laboring animal. "How long has she been like this?" "Started showing signs around noon," Jim replied. "Hard labor for at least 4 hours now. Mr. Evans sent for the midwife about 2 hours back when we saw the foal wasn't presenting right." Violet knelt beside the mare's hindquarters, noting the single forelimb protruding slightly from the birth canal. The mare's muscles strained with another contraction, but no progress was made. "I need to examine her," Violet said calmly. "Mr. Evans, keep her head steady." "Jim, I'll need clean water and all the lanterns you can find. We need more light." As Jim hurried to comply, Violet poured some of her aunt's carbolic acid solution over her hands and arms. The mare nickered in distress as another contraction seized her. "What's her name?" Violet asked, positioning herself to examine the animal. "Penny," Tucker replied, his voice gentle as he stroked the mare's face. "She's my best broodmare. 4 successful foals before this one." Violet nodded and began her examination, carefully feeling around the protruding limb. The mare groaned but didn't struggle against her touch. "The foal is turned wrong," she announced after a moment. "I can feel another leg, but it's bent back. That's why she can't deliver." Tucker's face was grave. "Can you fix it?" Violet took a deep breath. "I'm going to try. I need to push the foal back in slightly and then reposition the leg. It's going to be difficult, and I'll need your help." Jim returned with more lanterns, bathing the stall in golden light. Violet instructed him to hold the mare's tail aside while she worked. The next 20 minutes were tense and exhausting as Violet carefully manipulated the unborn foal, trying to straighten the bent leg without causing injury to either mother or baby. The mare's breathing grew increasingly labored. Sweat soaked through Violet's blouse as she worked, her arms aching from the strain of reaching deep inside the mare while maintaining a gentle touch. Tucker remained at the animal's head, his low voice a continuous stream of encouragement for both Penny and Violet. "There," Violet finally breathed, feeling the second leg move into position. "The next contraction should help bring both legs forward. Be ready once it starts moving, the delivery should happen quickly." True to her prediction, the next powerful contraction pushed both foals' legs further into the birth canal. Violet guided them carefully, ensuring the shoulders would follow smoothly. The mare gave a mighty heave, and suddenly the foal's head and shoulders emerged. "That's it, good girl," Violet murmured, supporting the foal's weight as more of it slid into the world. With a final tremendous effort from the exhausted mare, the rest of the foal slithered out onto the straw in a glistening rush. For one terrible moment, the newborn lay motionless. Violet quickly cleared its nostrils and mouth of fluid, then vigorously rubbed its chest with clean straw. Tucker watched intently, his knuckles white where he gripped the stall partition. "Come on, little one," Violet urged softly. "Your mama worked too hard for you to give up now." As if hearing her plea, the foal suddenly shuddered and drew its first breath. A collective sigh of relief filled the barn as the tiny creature's sides began to move with regular respiration. "It's a filly," Violet announced, smiling for the first time since their arrival, "and she looks perfect." The exhausted mare raised her head to look at her offspring, nickering softly. Tucker moved to Violet's side, staring down at the wet, spindly-legged foal with undisguised wonder. "She's beautiful," he said hoarsely. "She is," Violet agreed, checking that the umbilical cord had broken cleanly. "And strong to have survived such a difficult birth." They watched as the newborn foal, still slick with birth fluids, made her first wobbling attempts to rise. She fell several times before managing to stay upright on trembling legs. The mare had rolled to her stomach by now and was watching her offspring with maternal concern. Violet stepped back, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Her arms were streaked with blood and fluids up to the elbows, her hair had come loose from its pins, and her clothes were soaked with sweat and stained beyond repair. Tucker Evans turned to her then, his face illuminated by the lantern light and something else, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Above them, through the open hayloft door, stars twinkled in the clear Nevada sky, bearing silent witness to the miracle of birth below. "Miss Chapman," he said softly, his voice full of wonder and gratitude, "you brought life twice tonight." Violet looked at him quizzically. "This filly," he clarified, gesturing to where the newborn had successfully reached her mother and was nuzzling against her, seeking milk. "And Penny. I would have lost them both if not for you." Something in the way he said it, the raw emotion in his voice, made Violet's breath catch. For the first time, she truly looked at Tucker Evans not as the desperate rancher who had appeared on her aunt's doorstep, but as a man. He was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the sky just before dusk. A small scar bisected his right eyebrow, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. His hands, when they briefly covered hers in gratitude, were calloused but gentle. "I'm glad I could help," she said simply, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. The moment was broken when the mare struggled to her feet, drawing their attention. The foal, impossibly, remained standing, though she swayed slightly. Within minutes, she had found her mother's udder and was nursing vigorously. "Will they be all right now?" Tucker asked. Violet nodded. "I think so. We should watch for any bleeding from the mare, but she seems to be doing well. The foal is certainly strong. Thanks to you." Tucker turned to Jim, who had been hovering nearby. "Bring Miss Chapman some water to clean up and tell Mrs. Henley to prepare a room. It's too late for Miss Chapman to ride back to town tonight." Jim nodded and hurried toward the house. Violet opened her mouth to protest but realized the sense in Tucker's words. It was well past midnight and she was exhausted. The thought of the 5-mile ride back to Lovelock was daunting. "I wouldn't want to impose," she said nonetheless. Tucker shook his head. "It's no imposition. It's the least I can do after you saved my best broodmare and her foal. Besides, it wouldn't be safe for you to ride back alone at this hour." Violet conceded with a nod. "Thank you. I should let my aunt know where I am, though. She'll be worried when she returns home and finds me gone." "Jim can ride to town at first light and leave word," Tucker assured her. He hesitated, then added, "I know we've only just met, Miss Chapman, but I feel I should tell you your skill tonight was remarkable. Have you considered practicing veterinary medicine professionally?" A shadow crossed Violet's face. "Women aren't exactly welcomed in such professions, Mr. Evans. Perhaps not in California, but out here, folks tend to care more about results than conventions." He studied her for a moment. "Something tells me there's more to your story than a simple visit to your aunt." Violet stiffened. "My reasons for coming to Lovelock are my own, Mr. Evans." To her surprise, he nodded respectfully. "Of course, forgive my presumption." They spent another hour in the barn, ensuring both mare and foal were stable before heading to the main house. Mrs. Henley, the housekeeper, had prepared a small but comfortable room for Violet and provided a nightgown and clean clothes for the morning. Too tired to question this hospitality, Violet thanked her and practically fell into bed once she had washed away the evidence of the night's work. She slept deeply despite the unfamiliar surroundings, waking only when sunlight streamed through the window. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back: the desperate ride, the struggling mare, the newborn foal, and Tucker Evans' words beneath the starlit sky. "You brought life twice tonight." After dressing in the borrowed clothes, a simple skirt and shirtwaist that fit reasonably well, Violet made her way downstairs, following the aroma of coffee and bacon. She found Tucker in the dining room, studying papers spread across the table. He rose immediately when she entered. "Good morning, Miss Chapman. I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, suddenly shy in the daylight. "How are Penny and the foal?" A smile transformed his serious face. Thriving, I checked on them at dawn, the little ones already racing around the stall, full of life. Would you like to see them after breakfast? I would, thank you. Over a hearty breakfast prepared by Mrs. Henley, they spoke of neutral topics: the ranch, the weather, the recent extension of the railroad to Lovelock. Tucker mentioned that he had sent Jim to town with a message for Aunt Margaret, explaining Violet's whereabouts. He should be back soon, Tucker said, pouring her more coffee, and then I'll escort you back to town myself. That's not necessary, Violet protested. I'm perfectly capable of finding my way. I don't doubt your capabilities, Miss Chapman, he replied with a slight smile, but I have business in town anyway. Besides, I'd like to personally thank your aunt for sending such a capable substitute. After breakfast, they visited the barn, where Penny and her filly greeted them with obvious good health. The foal was indeed remarkably active for being less than a day old, her spindly legs carrying her in exploratory circles around her mother. She needs a name, Tucker said, leaning against the stall door beside Violet. That's your privilege, Mr. Evans. He studied the chestnut foal thoughtfully. I was thinking Starlight, born under the stars with an angel's help. Violet felt a blush creep up her neck. I'm hardly an angel, Mr. Evans. You appeared just when I needed one, he replied simply, his eyes meeting hers. The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken. Violet was the first to look away, unsettled by the strange flutter in her chest. She barely knew this man, and yet there was something about Tucker Evans that resonated with her: a directness, a lack of pretense that was refreshing after the artifice of her former life. Jim returned shortly thereafter, bringing news that Aunt Margaret had indeed returned and was relieved to know Violet was safe. She said to tell you she's mighty proud of your doctoring, Miss Chapman, the young ranch hand reported. Said she wasn't a bit surprised you handled things well. This praise from her practical, no-nonsense aunt meant more to Violet than she could express. Perhaps here, in this remote corner of Nevada, she could finally be valued for her skills rather than judged for her past. The ride back to Lovelock was considerably more leisurely than their midnight journey. The spring day was pleasant, with wildflowers dotting the sage-covered landscape and a gentle breeze tempering the sun's warmth. Tucker proved to be knowledgeable about the area, pointing out landmarks and sharing brief anecdotes about the region's history and inhabitants. May I ask what brought you to Lovelock, Miss Chapman? He inquired as they rode side by side. Other than visiting your aunt, of course. Violet considered deflecting again, but found herself wanting to share at least part of the truth. I needed a fresh start, she admitted. Sacramento held painful memories. Tucker nodded, not pressing for details. The West is good for fresh starts. Most folks out here have a past they don't care to discuss. It's the future that matters. Is that true for you as well, Mr. Evans? She asked, curious despite herself. A shadow crossed his face. I came west after the war between the states, served with the Union Army. Saw things no man should see. Afterward, I couldn't settle back into normal life in Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts. He glanced at her. The open spaces out here help. Room to breathe, room to forget sometimes. Violet nodded, understanding perfectly. And the ranch. Started with 20 acres and a dream 11 years ago. Pride colored his voice. Now it's 1,200 acres, 60 head of cattle, and a small but growing horse breeding operation. Penny's foals are particularly sought after. He smiled slightly. Though I doubt any will be as special as Starlight, given her dramatic entrance. As they approached Lovelock, the conversation turned to more immediate matters. Tucker mentioned that he would be staying in town overnight to meet with the bank and some business associates. He asked with careful casualness if Violet might consider having dinner with him at the hotel restaurant. Just as a thank you, he added quickly, for saving Penny and the foal. Violet hesitated. She had come to Lovelock to escape scandal, not to invite gossip by dining alone with a man she'd just met. And yet, she found herself reluctant to part company with Tucker Evans so soon. My aunt would need to join us, she said finally, for propriety's sake. Of course, he agreed readily. I'd be honored to have you both as my guests. They parted at Aunt Margaret's cottage with the arrangement that Tucker would call for them at 6. Violet watched him ride away, her emotions in a curious tumult. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to feel anything resembling attraction to a man, not after what had happened in Sacramento. But there was something about Tucker Evans that bypassed her carefully constructed defenses. Aunt Margaret, a sturdy, practical woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and keen eyes, listened with obvious approval as Violet recounted the events of the previous night. "You've got the gift, just like your mother did," she said when Violet had finished. "A natural healer's touch." "Mother never practiced," Violet pointed out. Her mother had been a society matron whose healing skills had been confined to ministering to her own children's scrapes and fevers. "No, more's the pity. Your grandfather wouldn't hear of it." Aunt Margaret's expression turned thoughtful. "But times are changing, Violet. Slowly, perhaps, but changing nonetheless, and out here, skills matter more than convention." It was nearly the same thing Tucker had said. Violet wondered if it could possibly be true. "Now," Aunt Margaret continued briskly, "tell me about this dinner invitation." "Tucker Evans is well-respected hereabouts. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings and generous when folks are in need. A bit older than you, but not inappropriately so." "It's just dinner, Aunt Margaret," Violet protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "A gesture of gratitude, nothing more." Her aunt's knowing smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she merely said, "Well, we'd best make ourselves presentable then. It's not often I get to dine at the Lovelock Hotel. Their apple pie is quite something." The dinner proved to be unexpectedly pleasant. Tucker, freshly shaven and wearing a clean suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, was an attentive host. He drew Aunt Margaret into conversation about local matters and listened with genuine interest to Violet's carefully edited stories of her work with the Sacramento veterinarian. "Dr. Parker was ahead of his time," Violet explained. "He believed women had a natural affinity for healing and encouraged my interest in veterinary medicine." "Sounds like a wise man," Tucker commented. "Did you ever consider formal training?" Violet's smile dimmed slightly. "The veterinary colleges don't admit women, Doctor." "Parker taught me what he could, but—" "Scandalous," Aunt Margaret interjected, "the way society wastes female talent. But as I was telling Violet earlier, out here in the territories, practical skills count for more than formal credentials." "That's certainly true," Tucker agreed. "The nearest veterinarian is in Reno, and he's often overextended. There's a real need for someone with your skills, Miss Chapman." The conversation shifted to other topics, but the seed had been planted in Violet's mind. Could she possibly make a life for herself here in Lovelock, using her healing skills openly instead of in the shadows? It seemed too much to hope for after the disaster that had driven her from California. As they were finishing dessert, Aunt Margaret's much-praised apple pie, Tucker asked casually, "Will you be staying long in Lovelock, Miss Chapman?" Violet exchanged a glance with her aunt. "I haven't decided yet," she answered honestly. "I came without fixed plans." "Well, I hope you'll consider staying," he said, his voice warm. "Lovelock could use someone with your talents." The way he looked at her suggested he might have personal as well as professional reasons for wanting her to remain. Violet felt that curious flutter in her chest again and quickly looked down at her plate. After dinner, Tucker escorted them back to the cottage. At the door, he removed his hat and asked, with formal politeness that barely concealed underlying eagerness, if he might call on Violet again. Before Violet could formulate a response, Aunt Margaret interjected, "Why don't you join us for Sunday dinner, Mr. Evans? Say 3 o'clock." Tucker's smile illuminated his face. "I'd be delighted, Mrs. Chapman, thank you." After he had departed, Violet turned to her aunt with an accusatory stare. "That was very subtle, Aunt Margaret." The older woman shrugged unapologetically. "Life is too short for excessive subtlety, my dear. The man is clearly taken with you, and unless I'm much mistaken, the feeling isn't entirely one-sided." Violet couldn't deny it, which only increased her discomfort. "I didn't come to Lovelock looking for romance. Few of the best things in life come to us when we're looking for them," her aunt replied sagely. "Now help me with these dishes, and then we should talk about what you really came to Lovelock for, a chance to use your gifts without the shadow of scandal hanging over you." Over the next several days, Violet settled into life in Lovelock. She accompanied her aunt on midwife visits, assisted with minor medical issues that people brought to the cottage, and began to learn the rhythms of the small community. Aunt Margaret introduced her as my niece, the animal doctor, which raised some eyebrows but also led to requests for help with ailing livestock and pets. By the time Sunday arrived, Violet had already treated a colicky horse, a dog with a thorn in its paw, and a goat that had eaten something disagreeable. Word of her skills spread quickly in the small town, and she found herself welcomed with a matter-of-factness that was refreshing after the constraints of Sacramento society. Tucker arrived promptly at 3 on Sunday, hat in hand and a small bouquet of wildflowers for Aunt Margaret. For Violet, he had brought a more unusual gift, a small, leather-bound medical reference book on equine health. "I ordered it from a bookseller in Reno some time ago," he explained as she turned the pages reverently. "Thought I should have it on hand for emergencies, but I think it will be more useful to you." "This is incredibly thoughtful," Violet said, genuinely moved. Few people had ever taken her medical interest so seriously. Sunday dinner was a relaxed affair, with conversation flowing easily among the three of them. Tucker spoke of his plans for expanding his horse breeding program, his hopes that Starlight would grow into a champion like her mother. Violet found herself offering suggestions about nutrition for growing foals, and soon they were deep in discussion about equine development while Aunt Margaret looked on with knowing amusement. "You should come see her again," Tucker said as the afternoon waned. "Starlight, I mean. She's growing so quickly you wouldn't recognize her." "I'd like that," Violet admitted. "Perhaps next Saturday," he suggested. "I could send the buggy for you and your aunt, and you could spend the day at the ranch." The invitation was extended to include Aunt Margaret, but it was clear who Tucker really wanted to spend time with. Violet accepted with only minor hesitation. Her attraction to Tucker Evans was growing stronger with each meeting, but she reminded herself that he knew nothing of her past. If he did, would he still look at her with that warmth in his eyes, the week passed in a blur of activity? Violet found herself increasingly involved in the community's veterinary needs, while also helping her aunt with her midwifery practice. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. For the first time in months, she went to bed each night pleasantly tired rather than emotionally drained. Saturday dawned clear and warm. Tucker sent his foreman, a weathered man named Hank, with the buggy as promised. The drive to the Evans ranch was pleasant, with Hank proving to be an amiable companion who clearly respected his employer greatly. "Mr. Evans is one of the good ones," he told them as they neared the ranch. "Fair, honest, and works alongside us instead of just giving orders." Not many ranch owners like that. Tucker was waiting for them when they arrived, his face lighting up at the sight of Violet. He helped both women down from the buggy with courteous care but held Violet's hand perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Welcome to the Triple E," he said, gesturing to the ranch that spread out around them. "I thought we might start with a tour if you're not too tired from the journey." The tour was comprehensive. Tucker showed them the main house, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, the cookhouse, the various barns and corrals, and finally, the special stable where his prize horses were kept. Penny and Starlight had a large stall to themselves, and the foal had indeed grown remarkably in the intervening days. "She's nearly doubled in size," Violet marveled, watching the leggy filly prance around her mother. "Strong as her namesake is bright," Tucker agreed, a note of pride in his voice. He leaned against the stall door beside Violet, their shoulders nearly touching. "I've been thinking about what you said about nutrition. Started adding that mineral supplement you recommended to her feed, seems to be making a difference." The simple fact that he had not only listened to her advice but implemented it touched Violet deeply. In her experience, men were quick to dismiss women's opinions, especially on technical matters. Tucker's respect for her knowledge was as refreshing as a cool stream in the desert heat. After visiting the horses, Tucker surprised them with a picnic lunch set up beneath a large cottonwood tree near the house, the only significant shade for quite a distance. A quilt had been spread on the ground, and a basket containing fried chicken, fresh bread, preserves, and a jug of lemonade awaited them. "Mrs. Henley's been cooking since dawn," Tucker explained, helping Aunt Margaret to a comfortable seat on a cushion. She was quite excited about having guests. "It doesn't happen often." The meal was delicious, the setting idyllic. As they ate, Tucker shared stories about the ranch's early days, the struggles, the setbacks, and the eventual triumphs. He spoke without self-pity about the difficult years after the war when nightmares had plagued him and the future had seemed bleak. "The land saved me," he said simply. "Having something to build, to nurture, watching things grow under my care, it heals a man's soul." Violet understood perfectly. Her own healing had begun the moment she'd plunged her hands into the work of bringing Starlight into the world. There was something fundamentally restorative about helping living creatures thrive. After lunch, Aunt Margaret declared herself in need of a nap and was escorted to the house by Mrs. Henley, who had appeared to clear away the picnic things. This left Violet and Tucker alone beneath the cottonwood, the afternoon stretching before them. "Would you like to see the creek?" Tucker asked after a moment of surprisingly comfortable silence. "It's not far and it's a pleasant walk." Violet agreed, and they set off across the ranch, moving at a leisurely pace. Tucker pointed out various features of the landscape, naming plants and describing their uses with the knowledge of someone who had learned to live intimately with the land. Violet found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet confidence, his deep connection to the place he had made his home. The creek, when they reached it, was a modest but lovely ribbon of water cutting through the otherwise arid landscape. Cottonwoods and willows grew along its banks, creating a small oasis of green. Birds called from the branches, and the water burbled pleasantly over smooth stones. "It's beautiful," Violet said sincerely, seating herself on a fallen log. "I wouldn't have expected such a peaceful spot in the middle of the sage." "That's Nevada for you," Tucker replied, sitting beside her, "full of unexpected treasures if you know where to look." His eyes, when they met hers, conveyed that he might not be speaking solely of the landscape. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sounds of the creek and distant bird calls. Finally, Tucker spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Miss Chapman, Violet, I hope you won't think me forward, but I've been meaning to ask, what really brought you to Lovelock? You mentioned painful memories in Sacramento, and I've noticed how you sometimes guard your words when speaking of your past." Violet tensed, her hands twisting in her lap. She had known this moment would come eventually, but that didn't make it any easier. "It's not a pleasant story, Mr. Evans." "Few true stories are entirely pleasant," he replied gently. "And I think we've known each other long enough now for you to call me Tucker." She nodded, gathering her courage. "In Sacramento, I worked with Dr. Parker for nearly 3 years. He was elderly, and as time went on, he allowed me to take on more responsibilities. Sometimes when he was ill, I would treat patients in his stead." She paused, the memory still painful. There was a valuable racehorse, owned by one of the wealthiest men in the city. The horse fell ill with colic, and Dr. Parker was bedridden with pneumonia. I went in his place. Tucker listened intently, his expression encouraging her to continue. "I did everything correctly," Violet said, a hint of old defiance in her voice. "Everything Dr. Parker had taught me. But the horse was very far gone by the time I arrived, and despite my best efforts, he died." She swallowed hard. The owner was furious. He couldn't accept that a woman had treated his prized stallion. "He accused me of incompetence, of killing his horse through ignorance. He threatened legal action against Dr. Parker for allowing an unqualified woman to practice medicine." "That's outrageous," Tucker said, his brow furrowing. "If the horse was that far gone, no one could have saved it." Dr. Parker said the same. He defended me vehemently, but the damage was done. Word spread. People began to question all the work I had done. Patients stopped coming. Dr. Parker's practice suffered terribly. Tears pricked at Violet's eyes. "He died 3 months later. His heart, the doctor said, but I believe it was a broken spirit. He couldn't bear seeing his life's work destroyed by scandal." Tucker's hand found hers, warm and steady. "It wasn't your fault, Violet." "Perhaps not directly," she acknowledged. "But if I had been content with the proper roles for women, if I hadn't been so determined to practice medicine, then many animals would have suffered without your care," Tucker finished firmly. "Dr. Parker made his own choices. He believed in you because he recognized your gift. Don't dishonor his memory by doubting yourself now." His words penetrated the shell of guilt she had carried for months. Violet looked up at him, seeing nothing but sincere conviction in his face. "After he died, there was nothing left for me in Sacramento. The new veterinarian made it clear he had no use for a female assistant. My parents, They were sympathetic but embarrassed by the scandal. When Aunt Margaret invited me to come to Lovelock, it seemed like the only path forward. Tucker nodded, still holding her hand. And now, do you see a future here? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Violet considered carefully before answering. I'm beginning to. People here seem to care more about whether I can help their animals than about propriety. Aunt Margaret has been encouraging me to set up a proper practice. She's right, Tucker said warmly. Lovelock needs you, Violet. The whole region does. He hesitated, then added more softly, and I find myself needing you as well, though I have no right to say so after such a short acquaintance. Violet's heart quickened. Tucker, I know it's too soon, he continued quickly. I know you came here seeking peace, not entanglement. But I want you to know that your past only makes me admire you more. Your courage, your dedication to healing despite the obstacles society places in your way. I've never met anyone like you. His sincerity was unmistakable, his blue eyes earnest as they held hers. Violet felt something unfurl within her, a cautious hope that had been dormant for too long. I've come to care for you too, she admitted softly. More than I expected, more than is perhaps wise given how little time we've known each other. Tucker's smile could have lit the darkness. Time is a poor measure of connection, Violet. I knew the moment you helped deliver Starlight that you were someone extraordinary. Everything since has only confirmed it. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth coursing through her. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see where this might lead, at whatever pace feels right to you. In that moment, beside the creek with the afternoon sun filtering through the cottonwood leaves, Violet made her choice. The past could not be changed, but the future stretched before her, unexpectedly bright with possibility. She leaned forward slightly, an invitation in her eyes. Tucker hesitated only briefly before closing the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and Violet found herself leaning into his touch, savoring the connection that had been building between them since that starlit night in the barn. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since I watched you bring Starlight into the world, he confessed. Violet laughed softly. Even covered in birthing fluids and looking like a drowned rat. Especially then, he affirmed, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. You were magnificent, fearless. Everything I never knew I was looking for. They remained by the creek for another hour, talking and occasionally exchanging gentle kisses. Tucker spoke of his hopes for the ranch, his dreams of expanding the horse breeding operation. Violet shared her tentative plans for establishing a veterinary practice in Lovelock, her concerns about the challenges she might face. You won't face them alone, Tucker promised. Whatever comes, I'll be beside you if you'll have me. By the time they returned to the ranch house, where Aunt Margaret awaited them on the porch, an understanding had been reached between them. Nothing was officially settled. Both agreed that time was needed for their feelings to mature, but the direction was clear. Aunt Margaret took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. I see the afternoon was pleasant, she observed, her tone dry but her eyes twinkling. Violet blushed, but Tucker met the older woman's gaze squarely. Very pleasant indeed, Mrs. Chapman. I hope you won't object if I call on your niece more regularly in the coming weeks. I should think that would be up to Violet, Aunt Margaret replied sensibly, but speaking for myself, I find no objection to the idea. The return journey to Lovelock was filled with quiet contentment for Violet. As the buggy rolled across the sage-covered landscape, she reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. She had come to Nevada seeking refuge, a place to heal from wounds inflicted by scandal and loss. Instead, she had found purpose, respect, and the beginnings of love with a man who valued her exactly as she was, skills, ambitions, and all. The following week saw a steady deepening of the relationship between Violet and Tucker. True to his word, he called on her regularly, sometimes riding into town specifically to see her, other times combining his visits with ranch business. They attended church together on Sundays, rode across the countryside when weather permitted, and spent countless hours in conversation, discovering the many ways in which their minds and hearts aligned despite their different backgrounds. Violet, meanwhile, began to establish herself as Lovelock's unofficial veterinarian. Word of her skill with animals spread throughout Humboldt County, bringing farmers and ranchers from increasingly distant properties seeking her help. She converted a small shed behind Aunt Margaret's cottage into a treatment space and began accumulating the tools and medicines she would need for a proper practice. Tucker supported her ambitions wholeheartedly, often bringing her medical books ordered from as far away as San Francisco. He spoke proudly of her abilities to anyone who would listen, and defended her fiercely on the rare occasions when someone questioned the propriety of a woman practicing veterinary medicine. Summer turned to fall, and as the leaves on the cottonwoods along the Humboldt River turned golden, Tucker invited Violet to the ranch for a special occasion. Starlight's formal training was beginning, and he wanted Violet to be present. "She wouldn't be here if not for you," he said simply. "It seems right that you should be part of this milestone." The day was crisp and clear, the Nevada sky an endless expanse of blue above them as Tucker led the now substantial filly into the training corral. Starlight had grown into a beautiful young horse, her coat gleaming in the autumn sunlight, her movements graceful despite her youth. She followed Tucker willingly, clearly trusting the man who had been a constant presence since her birth. Violet watched from the fence as Tucker began the gentle process of accustoming Starlight to the saddle blanket, speaking to the filly in low, soothing tones the whole time. The bond between them was evident in every interaction, every careful touch. "She trusts you completely," Violet observed when Tucker joined her at the fence after the brief training session. "Animals know when they're respected," Tucker replied, his eyes still on Starlight as she explored the corral with typical curiosity. "People too, for that matter." He turned to face Violet fully then, something solemn in his expression. "Speaking of respect, there's something I've been wanting to ask you, Violet, something I've been working up the courage to say for weeks now." Violet's heart began to race. She had hoped this moment might be coming, but now that it seemed imminent, she found herself almost dizzy with anticipation. Tucker took her hands in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought something to my days that I never even knew was missing: a partnership of minds as well as hearts. I admire your intelligence, your courage, your compassion. I love watching you work, seeing the way animals respond to your healing touch. I love our conversations, the way you challenge my thinking and broaden my horizons." He drew a deep breath, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "What I'm trying to say, not very eloquently, is that I love you, Violet Chapman. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me?" Though she had anticipated the question, the reality of it, the raw emotion in Tucker's voice, the vulnerability in his eyes moved Violet beyond words for a moment. She thought of the journey that had brought her to this point. The scandal in Sacramento, the grief, the flight to Lovelock seeking nothing more than peace. And then the night ride to the Evans Ranch, the difficult birth beneath the stars, Tucker's words that had marked the beginning of everything. "You brought life twice tonight." "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, Tucker Evans, I will marry you." Joy transformed his face, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance, before setting her down and kissing her with all the passion that propriety had previously restrained. Violet returned his embrace wholeheartedly, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could be contained within her chest. "I have something for you," Tucker said when they finally parted, both breathless and laughing. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "It was my mother's. I had it sent from Pennsylvania when I realized how serious my intentions were becoming." Inside the box was a ring of delicate gold filigree set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was elegant without being ostentatious, perfect for a woman who worked with her hands. "It's beautiful," Violet breathed as Tucker slipped it onto her finger. "Like its new owner," he replied, kissing her again more gently. "I want you to know, Violet, that I don't expect marriage to change your professional ambitions. In fact, I've been thinking. The old bunkhouse near the main house could be converted into a proper veterinary clinic. It's larger than your current space, and it would allow you to treat animals here at the ranch as well as in town." Violet stared at him, overwhelmed by this evidence of his support. "You've thought about this?" "Of course I have," Tucker said simply. "Your work is part of who you are. I would never ask you to diminish yourself to fit some narrow notion of what a wife should be. Besides," he added with a grin, "having a veterinarian for a wife will be remarkably convenient for a horse breeder." Laughter bubbled up from Violet's heart, pure joy spilling over. "I love you, Tucker Evans, more than I have words to express." They were married on a crisp November day in 1876, with the entire town of Lovelock in attendance. The ceremony took place in the small church, decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons by the local women. Aunt Margaret, resplendent in a new blue dress, gave the bride away with tears of happiness glistening in her normally practical eyes. Violet wore a gown of ivory silk, simply cut but elegant, with tiny pearl buttons that echoed her engagement ring. Tucker, standing at the altar in a new suit, looked at her with such naked adoration as she walked down the aisle that several of the town's more romantic souls were observed dabbing at their eyes. The reception was held at the Lovelock Hotel, where the couple had shared their first dinner. Toasts were offered, dancing continued well into the evening, and when the newlyweds finally departed for the ranch in a buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers, the entire town turned out to wish them well. Their arrival at the ranch that night held echoes of their first meeting darkness, stars overhead, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. But this time, instead of emergency and tension, there was only joyful anticipation as Tucker lifted Violet from the buggy and carried her across the threshold of what was now their home together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Evans," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the entrance hall. "It's strange," Violet admitted, looking around at the house that would now be hers to manage. "For so long I didn't know where home would be. After Sacramento, everything felt temporary, uncertain." "And now?" Tucker asked, his arms encircling her waist. Violet turned in his embrace to face him, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "Now I know that home isn't a place at all. It's wherever we're together." Their kiss sealed the sentiment, the beginning of a night that would join their lives completely. And as they moved through the house toward the bedroom, the stars shone overhead just as they had on the night of Starlight's birth, silent witnesses to the joining of two lives that had found each other against all odds in the vast expanse of the Nevada wilderness. Spring arrived in Lovelock with an explosion of wildflowers across the sage-covered landscape. The winter had been mild by local standards, though still challenging for Violet, accustomed as she was to California's gentler climate. But she had adapted quickly, finding joy in the crisp beauty of snow-covered fields and the cozy evenings spent with Tucker before the fireplace. The converted bunkhouse now served as Violet's veterinary clinic, equipped with supplies ordered from as far away as Chicago and San Francisco. Word of her skill had spread throughout the region, bringing a steady stream of farmers and ranchers seeking her help. Tucker had built a reputation for the Triple E as a place where animals received the finest care available, and Violet's practice had flourished alongside his growing horse breeding operation. Starlight had continued to develop beautifully under Tucker's careful training. Now a yearling, she showed every sign of becoming an exceptional horse, combining her mother's elegant conformation with an intelligence and spirit that made her stand out even among the ranch's other fine animals. "She's going to be something special," Tucker observed one evening as they watched the young horse in the pasture near the house. "Perhaps the foundation of a whole new bloodline." Violet, seated beside him on the porch swing, nodded in agreement. "She's certainly special to us." Tucker's arm tightened around her shoulders. "In more ways than one, if not for her difficult birth, who knows if we would ever have met?" "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Violet replied, leaning into his embrace, "but I'm grateful we didn't have to leave it to chance." The spring evening was perfect, warm enough to sit outdoors, but with a pleasant coolness in the air that made Tucker's warmth beside her all the more welcome. Violet had news to share, news she had been carefully confirming over the past weeks before allowing herself to believe it fully. "Tucker," she began, turning slightly to see his face, "I have something to tell you." He looked down at her, curiosity in his blue eyes. "What is it, love?" Violet took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Sometime in late October by my calculations." Tucker's expression transformed, wonder blooming across his features. "A baby, you're sure?" Violet nodded, her own joy reflected in his face. "I've been suspecting for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. All the signs are there." With a whoop of pure delight, Tucker lifted her from the swing and spun her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet, suddenly concerned. "Should I not have done that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby." Laughing, Violet assured him, "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. The baby is well protected." Tucker knelt before her, his hands cradling her midsection with reverent care. "A child," he murmured, awe in his voice. "Our child, I never thought. After the war, I wasn't sure I'd ever have a family of my own, and now." Violet ran her fingers through his hair, understanding the emotion that made his voice trail off. Tucker had spoken in quiet moments during their marriage of the darkness that had followed him home from the battlefield. The nightmares had faded over the years, but had never completely disappeared. The prospect of fatherhood was bringing those old fears to the surface. "You're going to be a wonderful father," she assured him gently. "You have so much love to give, Tucker. I see it every day in how you treat your horses, your ranch hands, everyone around you. Our child will be blessed to have you." He stood, gathering her close again. "And doubly blessed to have you as a mother. Strong, brilliant, compassionate you." They stayed on the porch until twilight deepened into true night, making plans and sharing dreams for their growing family. Tucker was determined that their child, son or daughter, would have every educational opportunity, regardless of conventional expectations. "If our daughter wants to be a doctor like her mother, she'll have our full support," he declared firmly. "And if our son prefers books to horses, that will be perfectly fine too." Violet's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to surprise her with his progressive thinking. "Our child will be fortunate indeed to grow up in a home where they're encouraged to follow their true nature." As the months passed, and summer gave way to early autumn, Violet continued her veterinary work, though Tucker insisted on accompanying her on the more distant calls. Her growing belly became a source of fascination for the entire community, with older women offering advice, solicited and otherwise, and expectant fathers bringing their animals to her with the barely disguised ulterior motive of asking questions about their own wives' pregnancies. Aunt Margaret visited frequently, her practical nature complemented by a surprising sentimentality about her coming grandniece or nephew. She had begun knitting baby clothes almost immediately upon hearing the news, producing tiny garments at an impressive rate. "It's good to see the family continuing," she commented during one such visit, her needles clicking steadily. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Violet, not just the baby but everything you've accomplished here." Violet, who maintained a regular correspondence with her parents despite the geographical distance, smiled wistfully. "I hope so. They're planning to visit after the baby comes." "Good," Aunt Margaret said firmly. "It's time they saw the life you've built. A fine husband, a thriving practice, and soon a grandchild for them to spoil." As October approached, preparations for the baby intensified. Tucker converted a room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls himself and commissioning a local carpenter to build a cradle. Violet prepared her clinic for a brief closure, training Jim, who had shown an unexpected aptitude for animal care, to handle minor issues in her absence. The baby, however, had plans of its own. On a clear night in late September, a week earlier than Violet's most conservative estimate, she woke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. "Tucker," she whispered, shaking her sleeping husband gently. "It's time." He was instantly alert, years of responding to ranch emergencies serving him well now. "The baby's coming. Should I fetch your aunt, Dr. Morrison?" Violet nodded, already focusing on her breathing as the first contraction built. "Both, I think, but don't panic first. Babies often take their time." This one, however, seemed determined to make a prompt entrance into the world. By the time Aunt Margaret arrived, driven at breakneck speed by Jim, Violet's contractions were coming regularly and with increasing intensity. Dr. Morrison, the town's physician, followed shortly thereafter, his medical bag in hand and a reassuring smile on his face. "Let's see how things are progressing, Mrs. Evans," he said professionally, though Violet knew him well enough to detect the hint of anxiety beneath his calm exterior. Childbirth, even in the best circumstances, carried risks that every doctor respected. The examination confirmed what Violet's body was already telling her: the baby was coming quickly. "You're already well advanced," Dr. Morrison informed her. "This little one is eager to meet the world." Tucker remained by her side throughout, his strong hand providing an anchor as the pain intensified. Unlike many men who preferred to wait elsewhere during childbirth, he had been adamant about staying with her. "I've seen hundreds of animals born," he'd reasoned when the subject first arose. "Why should I be absent for the birth of my own child?" Now, as Violet labored in their bedroom, his presence was her greatest comfort. He wiped her brow with cool cloths, supported her back when she needed to change positions, and murmured constant encouragement in her ear. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her as a particularly powerful contraction gripped her. "You can do this, Violet. You're bringing our child into the world." The labor lasted through the night and into the early morning hours. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with pale light, Violet entered the final stage. The pain was all-encompassing now, a force of nature that demanded her complete surrender. "I can see the head," Dr. Morrison announced, his voice steady despite the hours of vigilance. "With the next contraction, Violet, I need you to push with everything you have." Tucker held her upright, supporting her weight as she bore down with the next wave of pain. The sensation of the baby moving through her was indescribable, agony and ecstasy intertwined, the ultimate act of creation. "One more push," Dr. Morrison encouraged. "The shoulders are almost through." Gathering her remaining strength, Violet pushed again, feeling the moment when her child slipped completely from her body into the doctor's waiting hands. There was a brief, heart-stopping silence, and then the most beautiful sound she had ever heard: a lusty cry, full of indignation at being thrust so unceremoniously into the world. "It's a girl, Doctor," Morrison announced, his face split by a broad smile as he placed the squirming, vernix-covered infant on Violet's chest. "A perfect little girl." Tucker's breath caught audibly as he looked down at their daughter for the first time. "She's beautiful," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "So beautiful, Violet." Through tears of exhaustion and joy, Violet studied the tiny face now pressed against her skin. The baby had a dusting of dark hair, Tucker's prominent chin, and when she briefly opened her eyes, Violet caught a glimpse of the deep blue that all newborns shared. "Hello, little one," she murmured, trailing a gentle finger down the impossibly soft cheek. "We've been waiting for you," as Aunt Margaret helped clean and swaddle the baby and Dr. Morrison attended to the final stages of childbirth. Tucker knelt beside the bed, his eyes never leaving his wife and daughter. When he finally spoke, his voice was hushed with wonder. "Under these same stars where Starlight was born, you've brought life again, Violet, our daughter." He leaned forward to press his lips to her forehead. "Thank you for this miracle." Later, as morning light filtered through the bedroom curtains, the three of them rested together on the bed, Violet propped against pillows, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, and Tucker seated beside them, unable to stop looking at his new family with amazement. "What shall we call her?" Violet asked softly, though they had discussed names at length during her pregnancy. Tucker's hand gently stroked the dark fuzz on their daughter's head. "I still like the name we talked about, Margaret Starlight Evans, for your aunt and for the night that brought us together." Violet smiled tiredly. "Margaret Starlight it is, though I pity her teachers when she starts school with such a mouthful." "She can be Maggie in everyday life," Tucker suggested, "but she'll know her full name and the story behind it. How her mother helped deliver a foal beneath the stars, and how that night changed everything for us." As if sensing she was the topic of conversation, little Margaret stirred, her tiny face scrunching momentarily before relaxing back into sleep. Violet marveled at the perfection of her 10 fingers, 10 toes, miniature features that somehow combined the best of both parents. "I never imagined I could love someone so completely, so instantly," she confessed, gazing down at their daughter. Tucker's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I felt the same way the first time I saw you covered in birthing fluids, exhausted and still the most beautiful sight I'd ever beheld." Violet laughed softly. "You have unusual taste, Mr. Evans." "I have perfect taste, Mrs. Evans," he corrected, kissing her lightly. as evidenced by my choice of wife and the perfect daughter we've created together. News of Margaret Starlight Evans' birth spread quickly through Lovelock and the surrounding ranches. Visitors began arriving that afternoon, bearing gifts and good wishes. Aunt Margaret, serving as gatekeeper, limited the visits to prevent exhausting the new mother, but allowed a steady stream of well-wishers to peek briefly at the newest resident of Humboldt County. The ranch hands were particularly eager to see the baby, filing past the bedroom door with hats in hand and expressions of awkward tenderness on their weathered faces. Jim, who had driven so recklessly to fetch Aunt Margaret during the night, was permitted a closer look as a reward for his service. "She's real tiny, ain't she?" he observed with characteristic directness. "But she looks strong. Got her daddy's chin, I reckon." In the days that followed, Violet and Tucker settled into the rhythm of new parenthood with all its challenges and joys. Nights were broken by Maggie's hungry cries, days measured in feedings and diaper changes. Tucker proved to be an unusually involved father by the standards of the time, willingly taking his turn walking the floor with a fussy infant so Violet could rest. "I missed so much of life during the war," he explained when Violet expressed surprise at his willingness to perform tasks most men considered strictly women's work. "I'm not missing a moment of our daughter's life if I can help it." By the time Maggie was a month old, Violet had begun to venture out of the house, often carrying the baby in a sling across her chest as she checked on the animals in her care. The sight of a female veterinarian with an infant strapped to her body raised a few eyebrows among the more traditional members of the community, but most people simply accepted it as another example of Violet Evans' practical approach to life. "Start 'em young," one grizzled rancher commented approvingly when he brought a horse with an infected hoof to the clinic and found Violet treating it with Maggie sleeping peacefully against her chest. "That little gal's going to know more about doctoring animals by her 5th birthday than most folks learn in a lifetime." As winter settled over Nevada once more, the Evans household found a new rhythm that accommodated both professional responsibilities and family life. Tucker continued to expand his horse breeding operation, with Starlight developing into the exceptional animal he had predicted. Violet's veterinary practice thrived, with Jim taking on more responsibilities as her assistant. And at the center of everything was Maggie, growing and changing daily, her personality emerging in small but distinct ways. "She has your determination," Tucker observed one evening as they watched their 3-month-old daughter persistently reaching for a colorful quilt square just beyond her grasp. "That same focus you get when you're solving a difficult case. And your stubbornness," Violet countered with a smile. "Once she sets her mind on something, there's no deterring her." The winter passed in a blur of domestic contentment and professional satisfaction. When spring arrived again, bringing with it Violet and Tucker's first wedding anniversary, they celebrated quietly at home, sharing a special dinner after Maggie had been put to bed. "It's been quite a year," Tucker remarked, raising his wine glass in a toast. "A marriage, a child, and enough veterinary emergencies to fill a medical journal," Violet laughed, clinking her glass against his. "Not to mention 3 new foals, an expansion of the cattle herd, and that memorable incident with Mrs. Peterson's prize-winning chickens." They reminisced about the year's events, both the challenges and the triumphs, until the conversation naturally turned to the future. "I've been thinking," Tucker said, refilling their glasses, "about expanding the ranch." Violet nodded encouragingly. The Triple E was prospering under Tucker's management, with his horses increasingly sought after throughout the region. "The Pearson place to the north is going up for sale," he continued. "Jeb's getting too old to manage it alone, and his sons have all moved to California. It would add another 800 acres to our holdings, including water rights to a section of the creek we don't currently control." "It sounds like a good opportunity," Violet agreed. "Do you think we can afford it?" Tucker's expression turned thoughtful. "With the money from the Army contract for those cavalry mounts, plus what we've set aside from your practice. Yes, I think we can manage it. It would be tight for a while, but the investment would pay off in the long term." The discussion continued long into the evening, with both of them contributing ideas and considerations. This was the partnership Tucker had spoken of during his proposal, two minds working together toward shared goals, each respecting the other's perspective and expertise. By the time they retired to bed, the decision had been made. They would approach Jeb Pearson about purchasing his ranch, expanding the Triple E into one of the largest operations in the county. It was an ambitious move, but one that both felt confident in pursuing together. As they prepared for sleep, Tucker drew Violet into his arms, his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know something, Violet. Whatever success the ranch achieves, whatever we build here together, none of it would mean anything without you. You are the heart of everything for me." Violet reached up to trace the line of his jaw, still moved by such declarations even after a year of marriage. "And you are mine. When I came to Lovelock, I was seeking safety, a place to heal. I never expected to find a partner who would value me completely, my mind, my skills, my ambitions. You've given me that and so much more." Their kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of the bond that had formed beneath the stars that night in the barn and had only strengthened through the challenges and joys they had faced together since. In the next room, Maggie slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge, even at her young age, that she was surrounded by love. And somewhere in the starlit pasture beyond the house, Starlight grazed contentedly, unaware of her role in bringing together the two people whose lives had been forever changed by helping her enter the world. As the years passed, the Evans family flourished alongside the expanding ranch. The Triple E became known throughout Nevada and beyond for its exceptional horses, particularly those descended from Penny and Starlight. Violet's veterinary practice grew to include an apprentice, a young woman from Reno who had read about the female veterinarian of Lovelock and traveled specifically to learn from her. Maggie grew into a spirited, intelligent child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's quick mind. By the age of 5, she was already accompanying Violet on her rounds whenever possible, absorbing knowledge about animal care with remarkable retention. She was equally at home in Tucker's company, riding her own pony alongside him as he checked on the ranch's operations. When Maggie was 6, the family welcomed another addition, a son, Thomas Parker Evans, named for Tucker's father and Dr. Parker, whose influence on Violet's life had been so profound. Young Tom proved to be as determined as his sister, though quieter in temperament, with an observant nature that reminded both parents of Aunt Margaret. The children grew up in an environment that encouraged curiosity and independence. Both were taught to ride almost before they could walk, to respect animals, and to value knowledge above convention. Violet and Tucker raised them with the understanding that their futures were their own to determine, regardless of society's expectations. Lovelock itself grew steadily, benefiting from the railroad's expansion and the prosperity of ranches like the Triple E. Violet's position in the community evolved from that of an oddity, a female veterinarian, to a respected professional whose opinion was sought on matters beyond animal health. Tucker served on the town council for several terms, advocating for improvements to local schools and infrastructure. They faced challenges, of course, as all families do. Drought years tested the ranch's resources. A severe case of equine influenza threatened their herd one particularly difficult winter. Tucker's war nightmares occasionally returned, though with decreasing frequency as the years distanced him from those experiences. Through it all, their partnership remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. They consulted each other on important decisions, supported each other's aspirations, and never lost the sense of wonder that had brought them together beneath the stars on that pivotal night. On their 20th wedding anniversary, with Maggie away at college in San Francisco studying veterinary science, to no one's surprise, and Tom in his last year of school in Lovelock, Tucker surprised Violet with a special gift, a locket containing 2 miniature portraits, one of Starlight as a newborn foal, the other of Maggie as an infant. "The 2 births that changed our lives," he said as Violet opened the locket with tears in her eyes. "I wanted you to have something to remind you of those moments, though I doubt you need reminding." "It's perfect," Violet whispered, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. At 45, she was still beautiful, though her dark hair now showed threads of silver and fine lines had appeared around her eyes, evidence. Tucker always insisted, of a life filled with both laughter and concentrated work. Tucker himself had weathered the years well, his tall frame still strong from daily physical labor, though his hair had receded somewhat and was liberally sprinkled with gray. The scar above his eyebrow that had caught Violet's attention the night they met had been joined by others, the inevitable marks of a life spent working with large animals and harsh elements. They celebrated their anniversary with a ride to the creek where Tucker had first proposed, now part of the expanded Triple E ranch that encompassed over 3,000 acres. The cottonwoods had grown taller, the creek ran a little differently after years of seasonal changes, but the essential piece of the place remained the same. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if Starlight's birth had gone smoothly?" Tucker asked as they sat on a blanket beside the water. "If you hadn't needed to help that night," Violet considered the question, absently touching the locket that now hung around her neck. "I think we would have found each other eventually," she said after a moment. "Lovelock wasn't so large that we could have avoided meeting altogether. But it might have taken longer and the circumstances would have been different." Tucker nodded, taking her hand in his. Even after 20 years, the simple touch still sent warmth through her. "I'm grateful for how it happened. Seeing you in that moment focused, skilled, unafraid, I knew you were extraordinary before I even knew your name. And I thought you were rather dramatic," Violet teased, leaning against his shoulder. "You brought life twice tonight, quite the declaration from a man I'd just met." Tucker laughed, the sound echoing across the water. "I meant every word, and you've continued bringing life ever since, to animals, to our children, to this ranch, to me." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Nevada landscape, they gathered their things and mounted their horses for the ride home. The Triple E spread out before them, the result of 2 decades of shared vision and hard work. In the distance, they could see the house lights coming on as Tom, responsible beyond his years, prepared for their return. The clinic Violet had established was visible to the east, now a proper building with modern equipment and a growing reputation that drew clients from as far away as California. And in the main pasture, a group of horses grazed peacefully, including an aging but still elegant Starlight, surrounded by several of her offspring. Tucker reached across the space between their horses, taking Violet's hand as they paused to admire the view. No words were needed in that moment, just the quiet acknowledgement of a life built together, day by day, decision by decision, from that first night beneath the stars when a woman had helped a cowboy deliver a foal, and in doing so had unknowingly delivered both of them into a future brighter than either could have imagined alone.